So now we're moving on to the section on aggression. Now, the definition of aggression is hostile behavior with the intention of harming someone. Now, that harm can be physical or it can be mental. So physical abuse, emotional abuse, any of those things fall under aggression. Hostile aggression is based on anger. That's the type of aggression. And it occurs when someone is upset and they are responding emotionally with the intent to harm. So that's type 1 of aggression. Type 2 of aggression is instrumental. The motivation to harm another is not based on emotion, but instead it's a means to an end. So being aggressive towards somebody because you can get something out of it versus being aggressive towards somebody because you're genuinely emotionally distressed. So we're going to cover nature versus nurture as it relates to aggression. Are you born with it, or is your environment playing a role? The frustration aggression principle, like we discussed earlier, and conflict, specifically as it relates to social traps, mirror image, and GRIT. So in terms of explanations of aggression, we have covered this before, particularly with the behavioral approach to psychology. Y'all may remember Albert Bandura and his Bobo the Clown experiments, where he utilized observational learning to see how kids responded to watching adults behave violently towards a Bobo the Clown doll. So this is the idea of modeling behavior. It's more so based on nurture, so social learning of how we're supposed to behave. So how would media play a role in that? Well, you have people always arguing that violence in video games somehow correlates to violence in real life, or that what you see in music videos or what you see on TV can influence how you behave. But aggression could be reinforced directly or indirectly, meaning directly or vicariously. So when it comes to the influence of media, we don't really have a strong argument for causation, just have a very weak argument for correlation. But I think more so modeling by role models would play more of a role in the social learning of aggression. Okay, now when I say that it can be reinforced directly or vicariously, that relates to observational learning. So for instance, if you are playing on the playground and you're aggressive and you get to keep whatever toys you want because no one else wants to mess with this angry little toddler who doesn't want to share toys, well, that's directly reinforcing your behavior. Being aggressive gets you more toys, less people mess with you. Versus if your parents are aggressive towards each other, you could vicariously learn through social learning that that's how people are supposed to interact in relationships. Not that they're necessarily being aggressive towards you or you're being aggressive towards them, but you're learning through observation. So we see more of an argument towards nurture relating to aggression as opposed to nature. Although obviously puberty, hormones, that does play a role in your levels of aggression as teenagers. So moving away from the behavioral approach, let's look more at the biomedical approach. So nature as it relates to aggression. You could have genetic predispositions. For instance, some dogs are bred to be more aggressive and some are bred to be more compliant. Even among cats, for instance, ragdoll cats are bred to be like ragdolls. They just kind of fall apart in your arms and just lay limply. Okay, they're going to play nice. There's terrible stereotype against pit bulls being naturally aggressive. So, I mean, I don't really know how to feel about this genetic thing because I feel like how you raise them is how they're going to turn out, whether it comes with dogs or kids, but there is some sign of a genetic basis for aggression. Neural influences, like if you get more stimulation to your amygdala or more stimulation to your prefrontal cortex, remember that prefrontal cortex is responsible for personality and decision making, and your amygdala deals with fear and aggression. So yes, that does tie to aggression. Biological chemical influences. Testosterone, which is an androgen, a hormone that's produced in your endocrine system, especially as you go through puberty. High testosterone can increase aggressive behavior. So testosterone boosts aggressive behavior, and then aggressive behavior also increases the amount of testosterone. So this could be why there's a gender difference when it comes to aggression, where men are typically considered to be more aggressive than women. It could be a biological response to hormones. And then, of course, drugs and alcohol can play a role in decreasing the ability for you to make proper decisions, because alcohol and drugs often act as depressants that interfere with the functioning of your frontal lobe. So we know that alcohol is involved in about 40% of violent crimes, and it's involved in about 75% of spousal abuse. Okay, like we talked about before with addiction, men tend to have a higher rate of alcoholism than women. And then we see that paired with high testosterone, so increased aggression, decreased inhibition in your frontal lobe, then we see that frustration aggression model, not just an external emotional event, but actually leading towards the behavior in question. All right, so causes of aggression. We're typically going to cover John Dollard's theory, but eventually that theory is going to be expanded upon by Leonard Berkowitz. Okay, so first, John Dollard said that in animals, aggression is preceded by frustration. A frustration is an emotional response. You have a goal-directed behavior, like I want the treat or I want the water bowl, and then that is frustrated. That means your behavior towards that goal is prevented. So you're prevented from getting the treat or you're prevented from getting to the water bowl. That's going to lead to aggression. So if you try to give a treat to a dog and you're like, no, 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 and you take it away each time, eventually they're going to get aggressive and snatch it out of your hands, okay, because you've been preventing that goal-directed behavior. So frustration creates anger. Anger creates aggression. Aversive stimuli like pain, for instance, can also increase aggression. So like we talked about earlier in the year with correlation, there was a false correlation between ice cream sales and murder rates. Well, that was a confounding factor of it happened during the summer. It wasn't that ice cream was increasing the murder rate. It was instead that the heat was increasing both the amount of ice cream that was being purchased and the aggression as people became frustrated with the heat levels. So here we see the correlation is more likely between the temperature or the heat present during a certain time, thus leading to frustration. And then that aggression is going to be generated from the frustration. So there's more spousal abuse in hotter years and months as opposed to colder years and months. So we can tie a correlation there. Now, whereas John Dollard studied animals as it related to frustrations and aggression, in humans, we're more going to focus on Leonard Berkowitz. So he believed that frustration leads to anger, which is an emotion, which can then lead to aggression, which is a behavior. So emotion equals behavior sometimes. The cause of the frustration, however, must be intentional and triggering. So if we know it wasn't an intentional frustration, then we're less likely to respond with aggression. Let's say that somebody bumps into you in the hallway. Well, typically, the people you go to school with, right, or my coworkers, right, are not going to purposely bump into you. So if they turn and they say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, are you likely to start throwing punches? No, because the frustration wasn't intentional. It wasn't triggering. But what if your arch nemesis is walking down the hallway and they look you directly in the eyes as they step on your Nikes? That's intentional. That's going to be triggering. So in humans, there is cognition behind it. You have the emotion, the cognition leading to the behavior. In animals, it's simply you prevent them from the goal, and that's going to result in aggression. So sometimes aggression is going to lead into conflict. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to be physical conflict. Confrontation of any sort could be classified as conflict, but this comes from incompatibility of action, goals, or ideas. This could be something as large as national disputes or wars versus just interpersonal disputes between like a couple or a friend group. So this relates to the social dilemma in which you're in a situation that places the desires of one person into conflict with the good of the group. This is mixed motive interactions. So like an example of this is when an individual will behave in a way that benefits them in the short term, but it will hurt the group in the long term. So benefits one person in the short term, but it hurts the group in the long term. Now, this social dilemma eventually becomes known as a social trap, with one example being the tragedy of the commons. Okay, so the social trap is a situation in which a group work to benefit themselves individually, but end up hurting the group as a whole. So, like, let's say I said, I can give you 6 extra credit points now on your next test or on your project. Or if you wait until May 20th, I'll give you 12 extra credit points. Well, the group might decide, I'm going to do the 6 instead of the 12 because I don't want to wait that long. I want to go ahead and get my grades in. So that could be an idea of a social trap. The tragedy of the commons is, y'all may remember the commons in the Industrial Revolution. Britain had some land that was common to everybody, where you could grow food or you could let your cows eat on the pasture. But eventually, that common ground started getting sold during the Industrial Revolution. Okay, so that's what we're talking about when we talk about the tragedy of the commons. We're talking about the common ground where anyone could bring their cows. Okay, so the idea behind this is that you have shared resources. The commons don't belong to any one person. They belong to the whole neighborhood. But those shared resources can be depleted if individuals act in their own self-interest. So let's say that there's enough commons for every person in the neighborhood to put 2 of their cows in the commons. Now, if I decide I'm going to put in 3 cows, then, someone's probably not going to notice. They're just like, what's one more cow? But what if I decide to put in 3 cows, and Micaiah decides to put in 3 cows, and Kevin decides to put in 3 cows, then eventually are we going to run out of grass and food on the commons? Yeah. So that's the social trap. When individuals take advantage of a situation with the diffusion of responsibility, oh, it's not a big deal, I'm just adding 1 more extra cow. Well, you're depleting the shared resources. That eventually is going to hurt everybody in the neighborhood, but you are trying to benefit yourself in the short run. Conflict can also create the mirror image effect. This is when one side views the other side as diabolical or evil. So distorted images between conflicted parties are eerily similar. So like an example of this would be political parties, right? We see the other group as evil and untrustworthy. They in turn see us as evil and untrustworthy. Like you'll have some people saying like, oh, the radical liberals are doing this, that, the other. And then other people are saying, oh, like they're all Nazis, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that same propaganda, that same view of we're in conflict with each other. They're the opposite of everything we are. We are good. They are bad. End of discussion. Now that's a type of radicalization. That's not going to lead to positives for the entire group. Instead, it leads to more conflict. So how do you resolve that conflict? Well, one way is through GRIT, graduated and reciprocated initiatives in tension reduction. One side announces that they want to work together, let's reduce tensions, and then you start with conciliatory acts. So saying, hey, let's come to the table and discuss maybe sort of how we can get along. And then you do little small things like, hey, I'll free a political prisoner from this country if you'll free your political prisoner from your country, and we'll do a prisoner swap. Not a huge deal, just something to get the ball rolling. This is going to increase trust and cooperation. It allows for less isolation or more sharing of culture. But basically, it's the foot in the door metaphor for countries. You've already done this. You've already let go of this one prisoner, or you've already compromised on this part of the treaty. So you're going to do more. So with grit, to resolve conflict, you need to regulate selfish behavior. So maintaining social pacts, telling the individual who's putting too many cows on the commons, hey, cut it out. There are consequences. If you keep doing this, then you will face those consequences. Communication amongst the group and appeals to altruistic norms, the appeal to our common humanity. Now, unfortunately, this is the least effective mood. People are much more likely to be moved by, hey, if you keep being a jerk, we're going to kick you out, rather than, hey, you should just be a good person because being a good person is what we do. Because people want to get something out of that relationship.